if you please join me in a moment of silent prayer, reflection. Thank you. Roll call, please, Terry.
Pat Rooney.
Here.
Alan Ward.
Here.
John Maston.
Here.
Kathy Cox.
Here.
Nicole Cohen.
Here. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do I have a motion to review and accept the agenda for today?
So moved. Second.
Now.
John Maston.
Yes.
Kathy Cox.
Yes.
Pat Rooney.
Yes.
Alan Ward.
Yes.
Nicole Cohen.
Yes. Okay. I guess we'll turn it over to Mr. Murray for a review and discussion of the tax credit moratorium.
Madam President, members of the board, it's recommended that we review and discuss the tax credit moratorium. The moratorium was presented at a previous meeting where we reviewed the actual official statement, and it was a recommendation at the time to hold this type of a discussion so that we can determine how we're going to address this moving forward. So that brings us to today's meeting to have that discussion. I have a sample. Part of that original discussion and wanting to have this meeting dealt with what are exactly the tax credit clubs that are currently active, and do we have a list of those clubs. I believe it was a month or so ago I presented something similar to this just to a few board members, for their quick glance and eye on it, so that I can determine whether or not we were on the right direction and how we were going to format this. Again, you can see that this is a draft form. However, we do have the elementary schools and middle and high schools listed, and all of the appropriate and applicable tax credit clubs assigned to each of those areas, K through 6 and then 7 through 12. And this would lead us to a discussion at this point as to how we're going to proceed with the current moratorium.
Is there a written policy that came from the previous board that we could refer to? Or minutes of a board meeting?
You know, I presented that at a previous meeting, which allowed us to have this discussion at this time, but I do not have that included in the work session page. I don't have that in front of me. I thought about that as
Is it policy, or I don't remember, or is it just in minutes?
It's not policy. It was just a recommendation at the time from the previous business director, and then the board, I believe, just kind of agreed to that. That's what we would follow. But I don't believe policy was revised to state the moratorium.
Well, I guess if you have a moratorium, you're suspending an activity based on definition. And it was an activity that we didn't really suspend because we still brought things forward out of necessity, because a moratorium would have kept us from approving CTE club tax credit participation. So I don't think that by definition we had a moratorium. I'm looking here, and I've got, just in a rough count, I've got 77 different entities within the district, not including the elementary schools, that qualify for tax credit money. I think that I don't think you can have a moratorium, because we're going to put CTE programs in, we're going to take CTE programs out. So how do you stop that process? You can't.
And I think that's that's exactly why we're having this discussion, because we realize that an actual hard stop of including any type of programs to actually form as far as tax credit, we could not do that because of the need of our CTE program. So thus we had to make an exception to the moratorium without officially making an exception to it. So that's why I believe we're here, is I think we all agree that there needs to be a change.
Well, and again, my thought process is, why would you have a moratorium at all? I mean, if you understand that total amount of tax credit money in a given year is finite. In other words, only so many people are going to be able to give to a program, and that may go up, it may go down, but it's finite. We only get so much every year. And that limiting as much as possible the avenues that it can be given into is in the best interest of the programs that exist. Yes?
I know that the moratorium went into effect to effectively not add any new clubs because we had so many already, and it was already so divided that we needed to stop at some point, and I believe it was because the prior bond had not passed. Athletics was getting extremely deep cuts, is what I was what I'm understood. So anyway, the moratorium isn't on the current clubs and activities, it's on adding anything new. That's what it was at the time.
Well, and I appreciate that. I don't even think in my mind that my thought process references bond and override when I look at what do we do moving forward. I really believe that when you have somebody who wants to give to a particular item, that the community is now voting with its money what it does and does not support. If the community chooses to support athletics, that money will still pour into athletics. If it's a glaring need at Key Club, it's still going to pour into Key Club. So I don't see this as picking and choosing users. I think that we need to have a criteria for anything that is not directly district related, and that would be the clubs and the extracurriculars, like Key Club or Library Club, or these general ones over here on this one side of Mike's sheet. That I would believe that we would have a little bit more scrutiny for than, say, a CTE club for tax credit participation, or even athletics. That's my thought process.
I think, well, first of all, I think we ought to set some kind of standards for who's going to get an exemption. It's not just who we want to get it. There should be something that says, this is what we consider a valid application. And I think I used the example the last time of the individual put in wanting to do a yearbook situation. That would affect the entire school. I would suspect that would be more worthwhile to us than a club with 4 members. But I don't know because we don't have a criteria. As far as the moratorium itself goes, the moratorium is a good way to take the burden off of everybody making decisions. I mean, it's just a great way to say, well, all you guys down the grade school, you can't get any of these. Boom. Now we don't have to worry about them ever applying. And I don't think that's the way you should do business. And I think people should apply for them through their principal, through the business department, through the superintendent. And if it gets up in front of this board, it should be considered a valid application. And then we should decide if we consider it worthwhile for the district. But a moratorium is just a way to cop out, to avoid facing the decisions. And if I've got some teacher who really believes she needs a moratorium on something, me copping out doesn't make her feel any better. That's my feeling. I think we should do away with moratorium and put on our big boy pants and face the decisions.
On the CTE thing, I think it was a requirement, right, Mike?
Correct.
So in order to have that, that's a little bit different, if you're asking me, because it has to do with academic offerings that you have at the school. Well, wait a second. The other thing that bothers me is you can add, and you dissipate your efforts. We want this club, we want that. You can add so many programs that they become ineffective because there's too much dissipation. I think when you put in a moratorium, okay, well, you go, or if we leave it in, what it does is it allows some type of stability. We've already, I didn't see a big issue with CTE because it's actually part of the academic curriculum. These other things here are, and it's a requirement that they have that in order for us to get funds, right?
Correct.
Okay. But I've been in this situation where people always want to add stuff, and they don't realize that you really dissipate things, and in the end, you're probably not going to be very effective because it's just going to be a little here, a little there. And if you allow things to stabilize, and we get additional students but they'll add this club, and then it's for a short period of time, and it's out. I ran into that thing when I was the athletic director. These parents want to put in more and more athletic programs. Well, you want to be successful in what you're doing, and when you begin to dissipate things, what happens is you don't have that success. Success draws kids into programs. But that's what I'm looking at here. So I don't say, I think this is just a prudent way of saying, in athletics is what is funded by donations and all that. And you have all these clubs here right now, and you stabilize it for a while, and then all of a sudden, if there's more, then you can add stuff. But I just think so often we think, let's do this, let's do that, and it never turns out to be real good because there's only so much. And you dissipate everything.
Patsy, this is the problem that I brought up from the very first day we had a meeting. I asked, okay, we're all talking about where's the bond money coming from, what have we cut? Every time this comes up, we should be looking at what programs are still viable and what ones aren't. And having a moratorium simply allows us to keep this as a pat list, and we never address it, we never look at it, we never say we need to drop these three.
I see a moratorium as a temporary thing. You're not looking at long-term. The board...
How long has it been in place?
Well, how long has it been in place?
It was about 4
It
years.
was January of 2015.
Okay.
So it's not short-term now, and if we let it keep going, it'll never be short-term, because it's an easy way to avoid making the decisions.
I think as I listen down here, what would be the harm in developing a criteria set for entry into the tax credits? And let's set a bar that's high on the clubs and easy on the CTE stuff.
What do you mean the criteria?
What is the criteria if somebody comes and they want to participate in tax credit money? Is it just board approval, or is there a set checklist of
do they have to have so many members?
So many members, so much in already set fundraising?
Need.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was saying.
So we have clubs already, and they are not part of the tax credit program. So we do already have clubs, and they would not qualify. And so normally that is decided at the principal level at the high school or the other schools. And if the principal wants to recommend that this club becomes a tax credit club, he has reasons for doing it. And
well, that's what I'm saying. I don't see why we need a moratorium. And the CTE would be an automatic. If it was approved for a CTE class, then it automatically rates the tax exemption.
So the principal will make that decision, and if they don't feel that it's...
looking at the money available and making a recommendation.
I mean, we'd still have to approve it, but they'd have to review them. And like I say, there are a lot of things down there that I am sure teachers would love to at least try to get it, but they won't because there's a moratorium in place. And we may be overlooking possibilities that would benefit the district.
The other thing with the criteria is you also set a drop-off point on some of this. You would have a point where perhaps the club has dropped below a certain strength level in membership, or maybe they aren't traveling anymore. And once you get that, I mean, you may be able to move things off that aren't viable. So it may be a very beneficial thing to set some minimum criteria on how things come and go.
The principal does that now anyway.
Right. Well, and there are some legal criteria for it to be a tax credit club.
Yes.
So there's, what's that word?
Extracurricular.
Yeah, well, and Mike has a list here. One of the issues that came up is that just the easiest thing to do, back up. I can't push it off the table. Is to set the criteria up, aligned with the tax credit club, and then with the tax credit requirements, and then what other criteria would you have? I would like to mention two things that have come up just since I've been here in terms of questions. One of the things that was eliminated at the time of the moratorium were elementary clubs. And in fact, the only one that's remaining was the Habitat Club for Nautilus, because they had a grant, I understand, and they were maintaining a fish pond and so forth, which is no longer there. One of the areas elementaries have expressed an interest in is doing something like a STEM or an after-school tutoring, but they cannot collect tax credits for that. And that decision was made because of the kindergarten program. So right now we're offering full-day kindergarten. We're only getting paid through ADM for half-day. And so kindergarten enrichment is where the tax credit goes to fund the teachers for the other half of the day. The concern was, as I understand it, expressed at that time, is that if we add tax credit back with the opportunity at the elementary school, because we already know that, and Judy can attest to that, we have a lot of people who don't want to contribute to kindergarten, so they don't give it to the elementary. But that would then impact our general fund, because we would now have to pay for those teachers out of M&O. So we would need to plan for that. The other thing would be, even for clubs like a STEM club, there's not one currently at the high school, even though they do some stuff, because of the cost of materials is why those clubs don't exist. And so some of those areas would have a, I think, Kathy, you said the need. I mean, do they need the money to have the club? It's not like you're buying 3 chess sets. You're buying, robotics kits and those kinds of things. So.
Well, and I think that's one thing that we also want to make sure as we approve, that there are nice things that are done on the club side, but the clubs are more want. And I think we don't do a good enough job defining it. If I've got a kid, and I'll speak from my Kiwanis experience, if I've got a kid that needs to go to Weekend of a Lifetime or district convention, it's not that they want, it's not a need that they have to go, it's a want. It's a nice thing that they get to do this. And while it's beneficial on the education side of things, financially there may be a need there where they can't raise a certain amount of money. But it's a want. It's not something that is a downright, I gotta get this done in order to graduate type of a thing. So, we've also got to differentiate between the wants and the needs that we have in our district.
You just brought up a word that I haven't heard all night. Educational. That should be our first concern as a district board. What's the educational benefit of giving these people a tax break? And when somebody comes up here and applies for it, that should be the first question out of our mouth. What is our educational benefit?
And that is one of the legal criteria.
That's good.
Yeah. It does have to supplement the district or school's educational program.
I would like to say briefly, I'm sorry.
She's been waiting to ask her.
She's been patiently waiting.
Patiently waiting. I was excited when I saw on the agenda that this was going to be on the table tonight. And Grumpy and Diana, you have both hit kind of on some of the key points that I wanted to discuss. And that is that several years ago, yes, the kindergarten came into play, and we were told, elementary schools, you can't ask for anything. Sorry, no tax credit for you. And I believe that everything we do in our district needs to tie back to our vision and our mission of our district. And one thing that we need right now at Starline is we need an after-school tutoring club. When we did our CNA, the beginning of this year, that was one of the items that we got 0 points for, pretty much because we have no enrichment and no intervention after school. We don't have the money to offer it. But we've been trying for months to get the money to start this after-school tutoring club. Our kids need this. We don't have Title I, we don't have the money. It's not equitable. You had mentioned 77 were high school clubs or
No.
between the K through 6 or 7 through 12. I don't have a paper, so I don't know.
7 through 12.
But I just don't think that the tax credit is equitable between the elementary schools and the high school, and I think that kind of needs to be looked at. And if it's, I understand if it's a club at the elementary school that maybe is just enrichment right now, that maybe would take second place, but the enrichment part of it, it's for these kids. We have to get them some after school or some extra help because they're floundering, and we don't have the money at the non-Title I schools to do that. So we have been wanting to ask for tax credit money to do that, but we keep being told, no, no elementary, no elementary.
I don't want you to think I'm arguing both sides of the coin here, what I am. Because you used a word I really want you to think about. This isn't a matter of equity. It isn't a matter of everybody's getting their fair share. It's a matter, are we putting it where it best benefits the student? And in your case, perhaps we should. But what I'm saying is, you're going to have an inequity simply because of the fact that you're going to have more educational type programs just through CTE. You see what I'm saying?
No, I agree.
And I just wanted to mention that, because we get on the kick of it's got to be equitable.
Well, I guess when I
then
say
it gets ugly.
I think I understand
When
what
I say
Shannon's
that-
saying, because I agree with her wholeheartedly, actually. I think we provide almost an unlimited amount of opportunity for our high schoolers. It's constantly about the high school, constantly. And it's never about the elementary schools, so long as I've been here. So I understand it can't be equal, it can't be equitable across the board. But I would like to see a focus on our elementary level when it comes to some of our tax credits. I really would, because I don't think that they get some of the opportunities that these younger kids would otherwise have. Why do they have to wait till high school to have some of the opportunities that are out there? And I don't know what clubs would qualify at a elementary level, but I just, because we don't have any, I just have no concept of what that means. But of course I would, I would love to see, a Constitution type club that, Mrs. Klostermeyer isn't running around town in all of her spare time trying to raise money for. So things like that would be very helpful at an elementary level.
Frankly, I think I'm Diane Klostermeyer. I think that it is good for the people to be involved, such as me and the others on our board, because basically we see a need and we want to provide an enrichment program, not by getting a grant, but if we do get a grant, we should be required to double it in order to provide the program. When I tend to be conservative, so naturally I feel we don't just take a grant for free. We're going to try to improve on it. And fortunately, due to our little fundraising things, we probably will have twice as many classes this year because of the interest of the citizens and the parents. And I think Mr. Madsen had a fantastic idea. Set criteria. Show that it's improving, that it's doing some good. And yes, we need the input of private citizens too, and especially the parents. Where are they? Where are they? This is their school. These are their children. I don't have children of school age, but you know what? I love our country, and I love what it stands for, and how it was developed. And I think we should impart that same feeling of patriotism to our children, our grandchildren, and of course our parents. Where are they?
They're working.
Sorry, I'm sorry that I get so carried away, but I really think it can be done, and I think by setting criteria, your board can come up with really good criteria. And I'm not asking for money for PACE, because PACE is going to try to do whatever we can to support our school district.
I was just trying to use you as an
Thank you.
example because I can't think of a club besides STEM or
Well, thank you. I
tutoring
wasn't
or-
trying to,
Sure.
I just
I'm
want,
not trying to get you to go away. That's not what I meant by that. I still want you involved. I was just using you as an example because you're sitting there. So.
it's not a matter of going away. It would be nice if we could put some of those elements in our schools from the elementary school on up in the future. But that's for you to think about. And PACE could help with getting books, field trips, other things, instead of paying teacher stipends. Thank you.
So,
I'll go
I want
back.
to say a couple of other things. I'm sorry, I let everybody talk for a while, so I just want to get a couple things out before I forget. So I appreciate this list because this breaks it down from the vast list that we have in our booklet, and because I had no idea which ones were tax credit eligible. So this is really easy to read. Another thing for us to consider, and maybe that's part of the whole criteria or however we move forward in that arena, but every time we create a new club, if it's not a CTE club that's required, which by the way, CTE clubs, I think the club itself attached to whatever that program is should come to the board for approval at the time that it comes, not 6 months later after the class has been approved, because there's a general set for that, but I digress. Every time we create a new club, it's more resources. So I'm constantly hearing our teachers are overtaxed, but it takes a staff member or a teacher to be a member of that. So I think that that should always be something that we're thinking about, because we continue to add and not take away, right? I mean, we've all talked about that multiple times. We still don't see a point where we're taking away. Are there any of these clubs that are overlapping that anybody knows that they serve almost similar purposes?
Can I don't know the answer to that question, but can I add something regarding
Sure.
the criteria, and maybe this would help
Okay.
in the future to kind of help us understand if there are overlaps or if there is an ineffective club or a club that is dissolving, seeing declining enrollment. What I'd like to propose as part of that criteria process is also have a review process, maybe annually or every 2 to 3 years, that once a club is approved, that 2 years later or annually,
I'd say
there's a
annually.
review process to see if that club is still fully functioning and how many students it is serving, and to determine its effectiveness, because then that will force accountability. It will also cause us to just review, and even at the site level with administration, to review the effectiveness of some of these programs if there is a built-in review process. So if we're going to do the criteria in the form of having the administration come up and present their proposal for a tax credit club, I'd like to see a built-in review process as well, so it's revisited. Just a suggestion.
Just a quick FYI too, the Department of Revenue does specify that if a club, a tax credit club or activity has been inactive for 2 years, it is dissolved and any funds remaining are put into the owner preference account at that particular site for distribution. So there is a built-in 2-year oversight, I guess. And I go through that every year when I file my Department of Revenue forms for the tax
I
credit.
always point at problems we don't have. And I do that because we could have them. And that's good that if it's inactive, it's going to be...
I
But
agree.
the
I'm just
thing
saying
we're not
there's a little
looking at-
something there.
The thing we're not looking at is if I was running a club on Oriental basket weaving and it looked like it was going to have low enrollment, I would run out and get 2 or 3 people to keep it active so that I could continue to get more funds. Now, I know we don't have anybody in the district would do such a thing, right? But we need to be aware that that potential is there, that you can have clubs kept there in paper only.
I believe there's a lot of turnover in sponsors as well, advisors, and there is a bit of a problem in that respect. They don't necessarily even know how the tax credit program runs and what they need to do to keep it going. So I would just say, on my level, as what I've seen, that seems to be an issue too, is the advisors.
Is
And
continuity
one
of
last
the
thing,
leadership.
if I could just say briefly too, let's bear in mind that this is a taxpayer's privilege and right. And so we don't, I personally don't want to take away something that someone may hold near and dear to their heart. Something that I talk to the public about a lot is that we have something for everyone. If there are people who don't want to give to athletics because they think athletics already gets too much money or whatever, then I say, well, then what do you love? There's something, you know, rather than send your money to Phoenix, pick something that you love. What did you love, or what elementary school do you live in?
But as a board, we have an obligation to see to it that whatever they choose to put that money into is effective within the district. We don't just offer things because that's what John Jones wants. We offer it because when John Jones wants it, it's of a benefit to all the district. We are going to gain from it.
All of the district? Okay.
Well,
Mrs. Williams brought up, you mentioned education being a primary factor. Mrs. Williams is one of our teachers, and she's doing a fantastic job with PACE, but she mentioned the need for tutoring. Isn't our primary goal getting these kids educated so that they can move forward and excel? And this would be a perfect opportunity to use some of those funds to help our students move forward.
And I do have a lot of taxpayers who come in and do want to give to the elementaries to tutoring and things, and I have to tell them, I'm sorry, we don't have that option. So I'm not saying that, you know.
and I'm not arguing with you about
Yeah,
that. What I'm saying is
there are a
we
lot of
have to
people that
make a
come to me and
decision.
want to do it. Yeah.
The decision has to come up here. We have to decide, here's application A, application B, application C. Which of these is justified? And it may be and may not be what John Jones likes.
Judy, do we ever turn people away and not get the tax credit money from them because we don't have the tutoring programs at the elementary schools?
No. I
You
don't
would
allow that.
I have
They
had
leave
some
my
letters
office
from people,
money.
however, saying, I went ahead and gave to athletics, but.
Or they'll just give to the elementary school.
Right.
Or to Thunderbolt or wherever, you know. We just, like
So-
I said, we discuss other options.
So they can give to a specific school.
Oh, absolutely, all 8 of our schools. They give to all 8 of our schools.
And so then, if they give to the specific schools, the principal makes the decision on how those funds will be dispersed, or what?
No, not at this point at the elementary level,
kindergarten.
because the only options are all no preference or kindergarten enrichment.
Oh,
And any money in all no preference at the end of a fiscal year can only be allocated to a board-approved program at that same location.
okay,
And since we only have that one option, the money automatically goes there.
I see.
So if you add tutoring, then at the end of the fiscal year, or field trips or whatever it is that you want to add, then there's an
Okay.
option that the site council can take care of at the end of the fiscal year.
Does the revenue that we get from tax credit for the kindergarten program, does it cover the other half of the?
No, it does not. It just supplements from M&O. We still have the majority of it, elementary or a kindergarten teacher's salary still comes out of M&O, but it is offset by the tax credit funds we do receive for kindergarten.
I just want to be careful since that program is so important to us.
I think the money that we collect now, last time we looked, covers the salary for 6 half-of-the-day teachers,
Okay,
or 3 full if you wanted to look at it that way.
okay.
So it does not cover the entire program.
When it comes to the tutoring program, so Starline doesn't have one because they're not a Title I school. Does that mean that all the Title I schools have a
No.
tutoring program?
No, not after school tutoring program.
Yes, they do.
They do have,
I know we do.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, we have Title I tutoring
So,
for an hour.
so we would have a concept of what a budget for that would look like then?
It's through Title one.
Right.
And
Michelle,
Right,
you so would know.
but there's a pointed piece to this. We could create an after-school tutoring program where we don't have it in the district, set a budget parameter for it, and when that budget need is met through tax credit, we could turn the spigot off into it. We could say, no, we have that fully done, but you can give to the school, or you can give over here or there. Is that a possibility, Judy?
I would caution against that because telling a taxpayer you don't need their money in that particular place. If I'm coming in and I'm gung-ho that I want to help out the tutoring program and that's where I want to put it, and they say, no, you can't put it there, we're full, then I'll be like, well, I'm sorry, that's where I wanted my money to go. We have a lot of people like that, I'm just saying. A lot of people are, this is where I want my money to go, it's my tax money, every penny.
Then how do you handle it now when somebody comes in and they've decided they want to give money to the school for after-school tutoring? Because you said that was something that happened.
And they say, well, then just let me give it to the general fund and let them.
But correct me if I'm wrong, because we've had several conversations. Most people, I think, are open to option number 2 or number 3.
Okay.
Yes.
So I think that in rare exception, there's one that's just, this is where I want to give it, and that's where I'm giving it, or else I'm not giving. But I think for the most part, there are people who are open to a second option.
Well,
should option 1 already be?
And I think that's kind of where I'm going, is if we know what our need is going to be in one of these programs, you never say no to money. But could you then redirect it? And by redirect, I mean have a verbal conversation with the person and say, this area over here actually has a little bit more need if you'd like to place it there. And if they're insistent, we still put it in.
Okay.
I just see that as, that would probably cut the drain concern. That's what I'm trying to...
And I think we have to be aware, too, that Pat is right. You can't have so many clubs and so many things that you dilute the system. I mean, you really can't do that. But the other side of that coin is, you don't dilute the system if you do away with some things. And we never look at things to say, what can we drop?
Well, was my point a little bit earlier.
And I don't get me wrong, there's a lot of beautiful things here. But I'm sure a good audit will reveal that there's 1 or 2 of them probably should be left on the wayside.
I've already had conversations with the high school and CTE coordinator regarding that, so we are beginning to do an informal audit, if you will, of now that this is in paper simplistic form of looking at it. We're in the process of doing that.
If I may, I realize this is an overlapping conversation, but our elementary schools do have after-school tutoring that they pay for through Title I. It's pretty limited. And part of that is because of the fact that the Title I money is getting reduced, but also because the money that's going towards staffing costs have increased. So anybody who gets paid out of title funds every time we give a raise, whatever, that sucks up more of that. And so I'm aware of even the elementaries with Title I that could use some tax credit for that. And also because tutoring is very specific and it has some limitations and requirements per Title I if you're tutoring. It has to be so many teachers per student, etc. And Carol's over there nodding.
lesson plans.
There's
Everything.
There's other opportunities which, I'm going to use Havasupai only because I recently had this conversation, is they use all of their donation funds to also do what they call a homework club, which means they can bring a bunch of kids in, have 3 or 4 teachers there, and rotate through, which they can't use their Title I funding for.
Right.
And so it's not only just the fact that some schools have Title I, there's a lot of other limitations that come with that as well.
And the more money that comes into tutoring or homework, then the more you're able to offer. Instead of just maybe 2 days a week, then you get more money. You have enough money to pay for a 3rd day a week or whatever. There's never too much money for any of these programs.
Well, I mentioned a year, not 2 years, and there was a reason I mentioned that. If Mike's kid is in school and Mike really cares about his kid and Mike's making $200,000 and $300,000 a year, he's liable to donate a whole bunch of tax money. But his kid isn't in that class next year. His kid may have gone on to middle school next year, or may have gone on to high school next year. So we can't plan these programs based on what we see today. We need to reevaluate every 6 months to a year and see if the standard is still there.
If I can just offer my suggestion, I believe an effective criteria in place where everyone approaches the board in the same manner, with the same established criteria already planned out and then presented, and then the annual review in place. I believe that alone will either encourage or discourage someone from coming up here and standing in a public meeting and presenting their proposal for a tax credit club. That would also open the door for elementary schools to have their administrator come up, and there are many, many programs that the elementary school can benefit from. And I believe they can clearly articulate that in a criteria, an established criteria form, and it would be up to you as a board to then determine whether or not that is an appropriate use of tax credit money or not. But I believe at that point, the moratorium, again, going back to this, I was uncomfortable. I know Mr. Becker mentioned it a few times. It's kind of uncomfortable when you have a moratorium in place, but then you're kind of going around that because of a need for a CTE program. You now created, what happened is we created a series or basically a situation where this applies to you but not you.
It's the perception.
Yeah, and that's just, there's just something that's not right about that. So he's okay, this moratorium doesn't apply to you, but everyone else it applies to you. So I don't like that. I believe that if we have a well-defined criteria, then let them come and present and let them be prepared to answer the questions and have either a yes vote in their favor or a no vote that's not. That's just my, I think that is clean and with an annual review in place that allows us to continually monitor the effectiveness of clubs. And it opens it to all.
I think something else that Diane needs to make clear to people is that decision should be made at the lowest level possible before it ever gets up to this board. And I bring that up because it's very easy to say, well, I'll just send this up there and let Mike pass it on, or I'll send this up there. And no, if it comes up in front of us, I'll tell you right now, if it comes up in front of us and it's bogus, I'm going to ask them what they're doing in front of the board. Because it should have been stopped before it ever came up to the board.
Well, I think, though, that goes back to, we talk about site level and giving some power back to the sites. I think that's part of that process, though. I think, and I'm just going to, and I hope you forgive me with this, but I think adding one more thing to her plate is, I mean, it's not something that would
I'm
be
not trying to add it
for
to her
but
plate. What I'm saying is that, I'm not trying to add it to her plate. What I'm saying is, if it gets past the site and it's a bogus request, it still should never make it to here.
And I think the site level administrator should know that before they step foot in this meeting.
We're about to develop their checklist.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't pass the checklist at the site, it shouldn't come here.
Not bogus.
Right.
Well, it should be the site administrator who makes the case, not anyone else.
That's how it used to be. We used to stand up, and this was our case.
So how is this going to look? Are we going to do a review in the next couple of months before the planning for the next school year? Are we going to go through all the clubs and find out what the membership is? You know, how many advisors they've had in the past 2 years, you know, or 3 years? How are we going to go through this, and when do you anticipate something like this being in place?
We can establish or begin establishing the criteria now, and then bring it before the board as the proposal, and you can either adopt it or make some suggestions on how to modify that, and approve it as to form, or approve it with these certain conditions or changes, and then we can go about establishing the packet, if you will, brief, a short packet. It shouldn't be a 15-page proposal, but enough to supply you with everything you need to know to make an informed decision. And we can start on that. My office can start on that soon.
I think the question, though, is once we have criteria, then are we going to hold these clubs to that criteria? So if we have a club with 3 members, are we going to come back and say, this is the criteria for a tax credit club, and now it's retroactive to the existing?
Well, I think that those that are existing should be up for their annual review immediately. That should be those who are going to propose a new club, they go through the formal process of establishing the criteria and presenting to the board. But those that are already in place, I believe that the annual review should happen this fiscal or this school year and take care of that.
Well, that's kind of my question, because I know that right now people are, maybe not right now, but very quickly people are going to start making plans for the next school year. So is this something that we would do in January? So would we want to have it all ready to either go through the existing and the new criteria to make it effective in January, so that January of 2018 is the next annual? And review, that's kind of what I'm asking.
The timing of it.
The timing of it.
So then that brings me,
And that's also for handbooks and things like that.
Right, for everything.
So then you would like to review all of these clubs at one time then for the annual review?
I think that's the easiest way to establish. I mean, if you're going to go in and make criteria, I know it's a lot of work, but
On a review,
at least it's done.
On a review form, though, should that be a little bit more simplified because you haven't approved it?
I don't
know. Should they fill out the exact same submittal paperwork in the annual review?
I'd like to see
Maybe
the
not
submittal-
going forward, but maybe
I'd like to see what the submittal paperwork looks like
Okay.
just to start with.
maybe the first time,
Okay.
because honestly, there's
We establish a baseline.
it would establish a baseline, and it would explain what some of these clubs are, because some of them are just acronyms, and you can't determine what they are. So it would just be a fresh start for everybody at the same time, whether it's new or old.
So I'd like to propose then, from our standpoint, that I can get you this by January, and then perhaps in time for the January meeting, if not for February implementation.
I would urge that it be ready for vote in January.
And
So that would be
implementation in-
to lift the tax credit moratorium and approve the following criteria for approval of tax credit clubs. And then
So that in February, you would go through the review process?
that would be, because that way the criteria would be done.
That sure, from a budgetary standpoint, most of the service club attached ones anyway, they're looking at budget periods, August, September, October. So that would line them into that right budget section.
And was handbooks March or April?
Yeah, March or April. We started out with elementary and
So if we had gone through everything by February, it would allow the
worst case would
elementary.
be March.
Okay. And it would allow the elementary schools to be able to apply and then be able to have it in their handbook for the following year.
Yes.
Okay.
I just
Gives
want
a window.
to clarify that a club could lose its tax credit status, but it could still remain as a club.
Absolutely.
Correct.
And I just want
That is
to make
correct.
sure that's communicated.
We do have several clubs that are listed there in your auxiliary account sheet that are not included in the tax credit.
Now, do those clubs, if they're not tax credit, do they still have to have an advisor?
Yes, all clubs have to have a sponsor.
And bylaws and all the things to establish them as a club. And they can still do fundraising, they just don't do tax credit.
Really, the only benefit to that is that you're giving a tax credit to a taxpayer to contribute to tax credit money, but they can still contribute to the auxiliary account
Sure.
for that particular club.
Sure.
They just may not get the full tax benefit.
And they can't use the money in those clubs for the same kinds of things that the tax credit. The kids have to vote on how they want to spend the auxiliary funds.
Correct.
And it's, they could have a party. They could, I don't know, but it's that kind of thing. It's not anything substantive. It's necessarily education.
For student activities,
For
that's
student
correct.
activities.
Auxiliary, there's still some, there's still some flexibility there for them to have, to purchase materials and those things.
Yes, where they pay fees.
Correct.
Where they have to pay fees. The kids have to pay fees to be
Right.
in that class.
Right.
Yeah.
They can sell items, supplies, and then that goes to their, either into their student activities or the auxiliary.
Right, right.
Do we have policy on the auxiliary clubs, or, because it doesn't, to me, in my mind, it doesn't make a difference if it's a tax credit or an auxiliary club, if we're struggling with advisors and we've got no members, or we've got a ping pong club with $0. Like, I would like to clean all of it up, not just the tax credit. I know the tax credit is most important in getting the moratorium done, but we have a lot of stuff in here that has nothing. The soccer club, nothing. So why are we staring at it every month?
It's the soccer program, the athletic. It's not a club, it's the soccer
Right,
team.
but it's got to be a club in order to participate in tax credit.
A program, or it's not a club, it's a board-approved activity or program. It doesn't have to be a club.
The sports are not considered clubs.
No.
It's the
They're extracurricular or co-curricular. So extracurricular is before or after
Okay,
classroom hours.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to use soccer. That's just the first thing I looked at, zero.
Okay.
Let's use ping pong club instead.
I didn't know we had one. That's
Well,
our
I
tax
do,
credit. Is
and
that
it's
under
got $0,
activities?
and I look at it every month. So
That-
that's what I meant.
And that's in activities, not auxiliary?
Yes, it's activities.
Yeah,
Page
because
2.
auxiliary, I believe, is class fees more so than actual clubs. Clubs are essentially activities, accounts, and that's all fundraising and fun.
But it still requires an advisor,
Correct.
and it still requires bylaws, and it still requires a
Correct.
vote to spend money. So it requires all these things, but if we don't have,
It's just an accounting procedure so that you have a place where all of the clubs are. And if the kids and the advisor want to go raise money, like go to Panda Express and let's all go eat, they can.
I
But they don't
understand that.
have to. So
I
they-
understand that.
Okay.
I understand
But
that.
just
So-
because it's zero doesn't mean it's a worthless club. If it still exists.
I didn't say it was a worthless club. My point is if we don't have a ping pong club, if there's no current ping pong members,
Well, of course. But I thought you said because I'm sorry, I
No.
understood that because there's no money in the
it only
account.
draws my attention
I
to the
see.
fact that
I
it
see.
might not be a club because there's no
Okay,
money
I
in
see.
it, not that it's not a club.
Okay.
That's what I mean by we should probably just clean up what we have, whether it's tax credit, auxiliary, or activity. Okay. Oh, we spent an hour on moratorium. All right. Hopefully there'll be a really good article in the paper tomorrow about it. Okay, should we move into the agenda? Mrs. Esquire?
Yes, that would be fine. I'm hesitant to turn this on. Okay. All right, thank you. For our agenda for next week, in the recognition of visitors section, we will be having a presentation on the Arizona Revised Standards. Mr. Gardner will give you a summary of the revisions in the state standards that are finalized. Mr. Murray will be providing some information around our forensic audit report. And then we have the consent agenda. So on the consent agenda, 4.1 is our minutes for our regular session of October 17th, special session from October 5th, and there were 3 sessions, and then executive session on October 5th as well. questions on those minutes? The next item is 4.1.2, which is, of course, the agenda approval. Item 4.1.3 is the personnel report. And I do have a note on the personnel report. We do have 2 exceptions to policy in this report. And so it would be my recommendation that the president call an executive session for the personnel report.
I have it marked to do that.
To have that discussion in executive session. And we do have it agendized always for executive session to discuss personnel, so we can do that in a meeting. Item 4.1.4 is the gifts and donations section. And again, we have over 15,000 in donations for this month.
10,000 anonymous donation.
Yes, to have a supply. That would be the same donor from last year that gave 10,000 to have a supply.
Someone's a fan.
Pardon?
Someone's a fan.
Very much so. All right. Then we move into our action items. Item 6.1 is the approval for the construction manager at risk for the bond projects.
Thank you for sending over the
Did you ever
RFPs.
get anything on my follow-up that I asked for after the
I did. I don't have actual dollar amounts, but in speaking to staff that's been here for a while, the company that we're going to propose become our CMAR has done a few items here, other projects within the district, one being the WAVE JTED building, culinary arts, one being Mr. Brindis's education media area there in his area of the high school building. And there was one more project, the library project as well. And according to Mr. Simpson, everything was on budget. They had one minor, it was a matter of miscommunication actually between the JTED Center down there and the culinary arts. Apparently the district gave a certain dollar amount as a budget item, and then CTE actually had additional funds that they were going to contribute. And so the contractor had $1 amount and was working towards that dollar amount when actually he had more funds available to him. And so that, after a matter of just a short time, that was all resolved and the project finished on budget and on time. But he had no issues at all. There was one other where someone else signed off on the work at a high school project, and in fact, when Mr. Simpson went and actually inspected the site, there were a couple minor things that were not yet completed. And the foreman at the time, apparently, and this is, I guess, hearsay at this point, but the foreman who was assigned at that time, when he was asked about finishing it, said, well, you guys have already signed off on it, I don't need to, we're done. Well, the owner was contacted of the company, and immediately, he has the reputation, at least here, that he's very responsive. He came here, he looked at what was needed, and there was not an issue. He made sure that the crew finished that, and there was no problem at all.
So the ownership group for Core, which is a national company, is in Phoenix?
That's where they're at, from what I can see. They're out of Phoenix. Very large company.
So I just have a question on the back page, the evaluation.
Yes.
So I know this has got to be really simple and I just don't get it, but if there's a total of 250 points available, how is it that they're getting 932 and 1235?
There were 5 evaluators in this process, so each of them had their own score. This is the actual evaluators' totals, so it's the overall big picture. Yes.
I knew it was going to be simple.
Yeah. Sorry, I probably on that last page I probably should have changed those the points there. But that's why it's a total of all 5 evaluators in each of those criteria.
Are the evaluators going to be here on Tuesday?
I believe most of them should be here. I believe the architect will be here, but they will have representation from this company here as well. They will have a representative here to answer any questions if you have any. Mr. Simpson was an evaluator. By law, there has to be certain criteria met in the evaluation process. Just a little background on that. When you're going out for a CMAR general contractor, it's a construction manager at risk. So the benefit to that, and this is just for this session here, but unless it's brought up again next week, but the benefit to that is we establish a guaranteed maximum price and working with that construction manager at risk. And the benefit to that is the fact is when everyone agrees, all party agrees to that maximum price, that's the price. And anything that would exceed that is all on that manager. That's why there's that risk part. The only change orders that can be accepted are those that are initiated on behalf of the district. So let's say during the construction phase there's something that we want to add to it, then we can actually initiate a change order to up that guaranteed maximum price.
Well, I think that definitely is going to be brought up again next Tuesday because the public should know that. That will give people a lot of comfort because everybody in construction talks about the money is in the change order. So if they can't be initiated without the district doing it, that I did not know.
Change orders and rebates is where the money is in construction.
And that's why the process took a little bit longer than we hoped because the architect had to get further along in his renderings and drawings so that now the contractor coming on board will work closely with the architect and begin at this point just to make sure they're going to be able together establish that guaranteed maximum price because now the drawings are there, they can almost bid off the drawings. So that's where we're at this point. So construction is still, so far it's on schedule to be right there in January to start.
Did I read correctly when I went through what was sent? Did I read rubberized infill in Corps' qualification response?
I'd have to go back and look at that.
Take a look at that because that gives me a little bit of pause because what we talked about was getting away from rubberized infill.
I can speak to that right now. That there are no conversations, nothing finalized at all with any subcontractor, any vendor at this point. The Corps has to sign a contract. We have to enter into that agreement with them. And then at that point, that's when vendors will be solicited as to bid on certain projects. And that's where our input and your input that was received at that work session about the direction we'd like to pursue as far as the quality of the turf and the kind of turf, that will be part of those discussions. So then the specific solicitations will be centered around that.
Okay.
So at this point, he might have offered that as a suggestion, but or just part of his proposal. But all that is, it's an RFQ, not an RFP.
No, I hear.
So we're just looking at his qualifications or their qualifications.
But it does show the thought process and maybe a little boilerplate.
Okay.
So we can't, we don't have to worry about change orders unless we're doing it. What about rebates? John mentioned rebates. Do we qualify for rebates under this CMAR?
That'll be something that we'll have to talk in the negotiation stage. That's part of this pre-construction phase that we're entering into, because the guaranteed maximum price has to be established and the conditions set at that point. Now there is a chance that we talk about a guaranteed maximum price, and they may come to us and say, "There's no way I can do this for less than $7 million." Well, if we don't have $7 million, then at that point we separate. And then we might have to go out again for another RFQ and try to procure someone else at that point. But typically, with the architectural renderings, and the architect said he was budgeting on the side of where his estimate should be a little bit on the higher side. We're trying to set the stage that this should be worst case scenario. So we'll just have to see. I'm hopeful that everything will work out. The benefit to this is the fact that we have a crew coming out of, I believe it's Flagstaff with this group, that are wrapping up in December. And they're very excited to be able to keep them working and move them here and start in January. So the timing seems to be in our favor.
Aren't we in that little donut as well? Memory serves me. Isn't our friends up in Bullhead working on a field house kind of fits that donut hole? So this kind of plugs a hole in their schedule.
Yeah, they're actually the contractor up in Mojave Valley, I believe it is right now, Bullhead. So they'll have two crews in close proximity.
Item 6.2 is a request for board to vote on proposed revisions to the Arizona School Boards Association bylaws. And you can see on the cover page there are several proposals. My personal feeling is it's easier to look at them as they are spelled out compared to the before and after. When you look at these proposals, probably what we'll do is ask the board to go through and just give direction on each one of them on how to vote. Proposals B and C are on the exact same issue, and proposals F and H are on procedural kinds of issues. The rest of them are more substantive. Proposal G actually establishes a new caucus. So they're fairly simple, but those will take a couple minutes to go through. On item 6.3, this is our first review or first presentation of our policy on use of technology resources in instruction. And there are a couple of changes here that are formatting changes, but when you actually look at the policy, the paragraph that has been added is on page 4, which is the parent notification information. So in this particular policy, the change is that parents have the ability to prohibit students from the use of technology and the internet while at school. The other interesting addition in this on page 1 is the removal of DVDs and the addition of floppy disks. And so that was kind of interesting. So my question for perhaps Mr. Masden is, what's a USB drive? What is that considered under all of these?
Flash drive.
A flash drive, but they don't list flash drives here.
I would almost change all of that to the word media.
To the word what?
Media. And the reason why is media can be anything that you plug into the computer to take information off. Is this one of those from?
This is from ASB.
ASB.
And actually, that was already in our existing policy, this information here. Just kind of interesting that floppy disks was added.
Do we have any floppy disks in use in the district? Mike, do you use floppy disks in your office?
Not anymore.
No? Anybody? Floppy disks?
I'd really like to see the word media included in that policy,
We can do that.
and my thought process on that is I'd like to be able to go back, and if we have a violation of policy, we can go back and we can enforce on anything. Kid could come in with a flash card from the camera and download stuff.
And this is a first reading, so we can add to it and bring it back with a revision for the second reading. If you have an opportunity to look at it, perhaps and suggest where we add that word.
You could remove source of information and put media in its place. And any computer accessible, it says source of information, but make it any computer accessible media, whether from hard drives, tapes, and all those, or other electronic sources. Would be the simplest solution.
I'd almost put media in the list of commas. So I would floppy disk, comma, media or other electronic sources.
I don't know that I don't know why they are suggesting that you take out DVDs. You can burn DVDs and bring them in. So I don't know that
They
I
probably,
I wouldn't take it out is what I'm saying because, am I wrong?
You can bring DVD.
I mean, you can burn your own DVDs.
But when you insert the thought process of media or other electronic sources, you basically take out your paintbrush and cover anything
That's fine too.
that exists or may exist. It makes it more of a blanket.
just from a technical standpoint, it says compact discs and then in parentheses CDs. That's what compact disc is. DVD doesn't really qualify, I don't think, as a compact disc.
Digital video disc.
Yeah, so you'd have to spell it out, I guess, I don't know. But right now I've got leaving in DVDs, adding media after floppy disks.
And they left out the in parentheses there, after other electronic sources.
The parentheses?
That end one.
Okay.
Just start after networks with one and do not put in the final one.
Mine has one. After internet?
Storage devices.
You mean e.g. LAN, comma, WAN, comma,
Okay, that is correct then.
internet, and parentheses?
That is correct.
So that is the change on that policy. Item 6.4 is the request for approval to purchase transportation and maintenance vehicles from the bond funds. In case you have questions
I'm
for
ready.
Mr. Murray.
I had actually sent an email to Mike, and I had incorrectly included Mr. Simpson in it, but Mr. Cairns, I think, is the proper person sitting back there. We've got a couple of F-250s in there and a couple of, and an F-350. Is there some reason why we're not buying F-350s? Cost. So the $4,000 per vehicle differential is what you're going after?
Can I just speak to that? Because I did hear from Mr. Harris over at Sanderson,
Yes.
and he told me that he's still working on the actual formal quote, but he said rough estimate is for diesel you're looking at $8,200 increase, and then $1,000 increase for an F-350. So $9,200 if we would upgrade those trucks from a 250 to a 350 and put a diesel engine
Per vehicle?
Per vehicle.
Per vehicle.
Per vehicle.
Wow.
And seeing the other part of that too, again, just trying to be frugal with the dollars we have available, is those vehicles 90% of the time are not used for towing, multifunction, heavy weights, this, that, and the other, which, so why spend that extra dollar figure? Then diesel's going up right now. Diesel is rapidly going up. So again, there's a whole nother cost.
I'm looking at long-term fleet is my thought
True.
process.
We got trucks out there that are 40 years old, don't have an engine problem. The chassis are falling out from underneath them.
Right.
They don't have engine problems.
Right.
Again, that comes back to maintenance. You know, the maintenance protocol that I have in place for our equipment takes care of that. And again, the maintenance on a gasoline engine is a quarter of the cost of a diesel engine. I'm just going after cost. If you want me to spend more money, we can. But I just think we're going to get flack on the other end of that. So I'm just trying to be more perceptive to what the vehicle does per day,
Right.
cost-wise, and longevity.
I don't want to be in a position, and I don't know the mileage, and I don't know how they turn over, but I don't want to be in a position where we're going back for a vehicle after a certain period of time.
I don't think that'll happen.
Have you seen the van?
The van was around when I was in high school.
I mean, they really use the van.
Exactly. And the thing is like, I mean, I spent a lot of time with Mr. Harris on multiple phone calls and emails and stuff, and I'm basically trying to spec the vehicle to what it's used for on a daily basis. You know, and that's kind of how I'm having him help me outfit everything as well.
I understand that. I just caught that there was about a $4,000 or $5,000 difference.
Yeah, it's
On the-
pretty substantial as far as cost.
But when I looked at it, I saw that we were buying two at 73 and one at 37.
Right.
And so I kind of looked at that and I said, okay, we've got about a $4,000 differential. Why? For a $4,000 differential, it may pay us a dividend in longevity. That was really the question.
The F-350 that I'd like to purchase, and I'm purchasing that out of transportation funds, will be used as a basis of transportation, mainly for towing the band trailer, because I wanted a larger vehicle, bigger footprint, longevity diesel-wise as far as towing, moving heavy equipment if need be, whatever. So again, I kind of spec'd that vehicle for the purpose that it was going to be mainly used for.
So I guess that brings me back to the fleet question, and kind of my thought process when I look at fleet is I like to have some position switching available. So if I have one that retires prematurely,
right,
how do I rotate my fleet around as opposed to doing a direct vehicle replacement?
Right. Understood.
Is there any thought process in that and how we're procuring?
Well, ultimately, again, it's kind of an in-play status, I guess. But I mean, if something goes down, then obviously the thing is what's it going to cost to fix that vehicle? Is it worth fixing? So on and so forth. Obviously, right away, I'm going to be umbrellaed under some warranty for a while on several of these vehicles because they're not going to put the mileage on. They start to dry rot before they actually get mileage on them. So I mean, I'm going to get some umbrella under that as far as warranty. But there's always, let's just say, an engine fails. Doing a swing-in long block is a pretty simple scenario, and buying a crate engine is not very expensive.
Right.
I mean, it's a very simple process. So, 2 days and the vehicle's back up. So, I mean, ultimately, I don't see a big issue there if for the 1% chance of having that failure. Reman transmissions, reman engines are fairly cheap and easy to do. And again, gasoline, a whole lot cheaper than diesel.
Just out of curiosity's sake, because I want to bring myself up to speed, there aren't really that many cases where you're going to need an F-350.
No.
The F-250 can haul just about, they can haul just about everything you got over there except perhaps that big trailer.
Exactly.
We all want a 350. I want one real bad.
Oh, we want the whole lifted thing with the big motor tires. Oh, for sure. But like I say, I mean, I'm just trying to get the bang for the buck, but also spec the vehicle for what it's going to do on a day-to-day basis.
And there's also a few vehicles, few trucks in our fleet that are still in decent shape. And
right.
Mr. Kearns and I were talking the other day about the fact that he has a vision of taking a couple of our trucks, one in particular that's still in very good shape considering, and just reupholstering a bench seat, to kind of refurbishing that and getting that up to where we continue to use it versus spending, $40,000 on a new truck. So there's a plan in place to refurbish and to rotate out, but not completely get rid of what we have and replace it with new. We want to kind of cycle it and create a more of a sustainable plan of rotating our fleet.
Well, and that again too, like the way I have my bus fleet too, I have a vehicle that's what I consider a spare. Guy goes down, needs a repair or whatever, he still has another truck available to still go to work. It's an older truck, but it's still a truck he can go to work with. He's not, well, John, I can't work today. No, you can still go to work. You got a vehicle,
Right.
So that again is kind of where that comes into place too. So.
And that just happened just the other day when I walked back there with a special ed bus. He had one coming out of the bay and it didn't make it 10 feet, and something happened and they had to use one of the spares quickly to continue with the routes. That bus was back up and running within a couple hours.
Yeah, a couple hours, but still.
But that's the beauty of having something there to back
School
up.
doesn't wait.
I've got a separate question. Having come from Texas, this is sort of in my bailiwick. I notice your John Deere mower here. What are we talking about? I mean, John Deere mower could be nothing more than a little giddy go.
No, it's a 1600 mower, and I basically spec'd it off of the one that we already have. It's the identical mower that we have now that we in place. It's a large 3-deck mower. I don't know a whole lot about them. I don't know a lot of the different models and variations to them and stuff, but when I sat down with Mr. Simpson about, what could we use, what's efficient, what could we do better, or whatever, the mower that they're using in place now, other than age and hours, works incredible. I said, well, you want to match something like that? You want to do something a little bit different? And he says, I think we should just stay with the same thing. So I kind of did some shopping on that a little bit, and then we were able to find a Mojave Co-op just right down here in Ehrenberg, and they actually gave us the best deal considering what I could get, again, for a John Deere mower of that size.
The only reason I'm asking is we have a joke in Texas that you can either buy green paint or orange paint.
Right. Right.
They're very expensive. That paint is very expensive.
You are paying for a name, but again, you're getting what you pay for too. It is, that mower we got it's been around for a while. I know because I used to work on it. So.
I'll trust you.
Sounds good.
Well, I brought my bond paperwork that says we won't spend more than $302,000 in 2017.
I ran my Massey Ferguson to death.
The next item on the agenda is to look at the possibility of approving a board member for the Employee Benefit Trust, with the trust board and our governing board approving the new trust document. That does make our governing board member who serves on that committee an ex officio or non-voting member. And so the board has an option to look at. We have 3 candidates that were remaining from the last time that we went out. And all 3 of those candidates are interested in being considered again. And so that was Dr. Atassi, Mr. Feliciano, and Mr. Myers. Unfortunately, they cannot be at the meeting on this short notice. That is Thanksgiving week, and so they had other plans. I can't speak for Dr. Atassi, but the other 2 can't be at the meeting. The other option would be to, because they do have 4 members and that constitutes a quorum, would be to wait and do another application process. So that would be up to the board if that is the consideration for our meeting. And would you like for me to provide those 3 resumes to you, since we did it electronically last time? And, or do you have them?
Still.
Do you have them still?
I still have them.
Yeah, okay. I don't want to make duplicate copies if we don't need to. Item 6.6 is a discussion and possible action to, it says establish your advisory committees. We've actually established those committees, but to define those committees and to appoint board members to those committees. And so we have been talking about the establishment of a curriculum committee and a discipline committee. And so what we are asking is for the board to have a discussion on what would be the purpose of each of these subcommittees and to actually appoint 2 board members maximum to each of those subcommittees. The purpose discussion, which should occur at the regular board meeting, would include what are the areas of focus in terms of district needs, community interests, and priorities, and then also the policies that are related to those committees, which I can provide some information on. And then for the curriculum committee particularly, some of the recommendations that came out of our comprehensive needs assessment would be part of those considerations. And then for the discipline committee, as I recall, the information was around the handbooks and the suspension data, having a chance to look at that and look at how we might make revisions in time for any of those to go into our handbooks. And so those would be the 2 committees that we would be asking to assign.
How will the other members of those committees be selected?
That needs to be a discussion as well. Thank you for asking. So there are, either the board could appoint those members, or you could ask the district to identify members, or you could set criteria for the members for us to find. That would be up to you for your discussion. Some of that might depend on what the purpose of that committee is. So, for example, on our policy and statute requires that if you're going to do a curriculum adoption, you have to have a teacher committee. So that would be a separate committee that would also review and perhaps bring an advisory to the board, curriculum committee. But the curriculum committee may work with what are those priorities? Where do we look first? for those adoptions. On something like a discipline committee, I would very strongly recommend that high school and middle school principals be involved in those committees because it has such an impact on their site. There should be a certain representation that would be considered there.
And I just want to say that on the discipline, I remember we talked multiple times over the past year about zero tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And then part of my notes that I just made as far as helping for the discussion would be, what is our philosophy about discipline? And that would be a beginning point to establish. And then looking at our policies, JIC is student conduct and JK is student discipline, and that might be the first place to do, is look at those policies and see if that reflects our philosophy. And then taking that philosophy and going specifically into our handbook. So how does that look at the elementary level? How does that look at middle school? How does it look at high school? And I have some other notes, but there are conversations about is it zero tolerance or is discipline contextual? And if it's contextual, then what are the criteria? So if it's the first incidents, is it the severity of the incidents? I mean, those are the kinds of things that get into those as part of that discipline discussion.
And what will, at this board meeting next week, what is the procedure by which the two board members will be selected? Will there be a nomination in a second and then a vote, or do you have another procedure in mind?
I think that you could determine that. Certainly the board president is in places that I have worked, it has been who's interested first, perhaps, or who's not interested, and then going by whether then if it's too many that are interested, then we need to vote, and that sort of thing.
I know I'm interested in the curriculum committee, so I don't know if anybody on the board has interest.
I'm interested in discipline.
I'm interested in both.
You know my feeling about committees. I'd rather be on curriculum than discipline. I don't think I should be on discipline. I've got too deep a background.
Said the Marine.
And a sheriff's deputy.
Right.
So yeah, I think that would be thinking about that. If you had separate members, the four of you could serve out of 5 on a committee if it was not the same. But if you're, some of you are not interested and you want to duplicate committees, that would be up to you as well. It's a lot of work.
When do you expect to activate these committees? When do you think that will happen? In December?
In an ideal world, yes. And it certainly is, if we have an idea already of who we would want on those committees, it would be very easy to then contact them and say, are you willing to serve? We'll have a meeting and establish our committee. Because we do have 3 weeks, solid weeks in December that we can get some work done. Just as a sooner rather than later, because we have handbooks to do, and that's the process. We want to get that information out. If we're going to do adoptions, we need to plan for that. I think the curriculum committee could also consider things like overall district needs, how we're dealing with our students that are not coming to our district, looking at magnet programs. I mean, those are all things that the curriculum committee could discuss. So that's pretty broad. It's not just textbook adoption. So that may be something that goes in phases depending on the topics. And then, of course, we're starting up our budget committee again in January as well. So we're going to be doing a lot of work.
And I see that these are open to, subject to the open meeting law, which means that if a board member wants to serve but is not able to, that board member can come and participate.
Correct. Not as a committee member, but you can certainly be present for
to give input.
Can I just say something? about the curriculum committee. I don't think we need to be too broad at this point. I think we need to revise and review what we've got instead of trying to spread this thing out and make it a monster, if I'm making sense.
Yeah.
We probably need to take a close look at what we've got and what we need and accomplish something.
And we are looking at that right now. This came very clearly out of the comprehensive needs assessment, is the age and quality of some of our materials. One of the questions that we posed today at our administrators meeting is we hear we need new texts, but what is it we really need? What is it that people are looking for? Is it a standardized resource? Is it content options for those who don't have depth of content? Is it formative assessments that are provided through this adoption process? What is it that people are really needing out of it, as opposed to just the idea that we need to have a new book because this one is old?
Was there an answer? An overwhelming majority of people thought that they
This
needed-
was with the principals, so we want them to have that discussion with
their
teachers.
staff. Okay.
But the one thing that came out at the elementary level, which is not probably surprising, is, for example, in the math, teachers are asked to teach multiple strategies for solving problems. Well, some of those teachers haven't mastered multiple strategies. And so what a text will provide is a description of all of the strategies that you would need. Are you nodding? I'm not looking at you. So, so those are the kinds of things where it's more of an actual access to content that is needed. And then I don't want to, Carol, I don't want to insult anybody. So. But there's also that idea that if you haven't had training and you don't know the value of the resource that you have necessarily, then there's a lot of non-vetted things that are getting pulled into classrooms. And so, I found this on Pinterest, or teachers create, whatever it's called. Yeah, so, there's a lot of stuff out there which may or may not be good, but there's not really any continuity. And so if I'm a student at Jamaica and I transfer to Oronde, we maybe have total interpretations of the standard, how to teach it, and where we've covered in a text. So that's an elementary issue that came.
This is completely off the subject. Do we have procedure for approving reading lists and reading materials?
I don't think lists and materials, just textbooks.
No, just textbooks. So anything that is required to be used by students has to be board approved. Now there can be, and I couldn't speak to this, and Mr. Gardner will be here next week, but supplemental texts often involve some choice. So there would be perhaps a list of novels that would be supplemental. I don't know, maybe you guys know historically if those ever came to the board for approval. And one of the things we need to go back and look at is what our policy is.
I want to say at one point, when we adopted Tuck Everlasting, or when we created a scope and sequence from, 6th grade on up, or even 4th and 5th grade on up, there was a time, but I don't know if we've ever brought them back with new novels that have come.
I don't know. I know it just from typically supplemental texts that, even if they're choice texts, particularly novelists, typically come for approval at some point. But my guess is this would have been done probably like in the late 90s.
I do know with our last literature textbook adoption with Prentice Hall, there was the books that came with it. So when we bought Prentice Hall for 6 through 8, it said which novels would you like. So we chose specific novels that went with.
And so that would have been part of the core adoption.
Right.
Yeah, that would have been a part of that.
I just asked because we were allowed a lot of latitude, but we had to submit any reading list we were going to give the students for approval. Mm-hmm. And occasionally, the administration would come back and say, not that one. That's the only reason I'm asking.
Mm-hmm.
My question when these committees are created, and I only say that because Carol's sitting there, she attends so many things. So if we have teachers that are sitting on these committees, is that something they can check the box on, you know? Yeah, okay.
Even if it's after hours.
It's one box on several pages, but it's one box.
Larry at the beginning.
And we have, and I didn't bring them with me, I will send out the information. We have established our budget committee dates, even though we haven't moved forward, just need to get them on the calendar, so. All right. Item 6.7 is an item to request that the board approve the spending of bond funds on painting at Lake Havasu High School. This is for the areas that would not be included in the building weatherization, such as railing and walls and so forth.
Just like the state. They don't let you have money to build a school that includes sidewalks or hallways. Now they won't paint the railings either.
Although we did get way more money than we had budgeted to spend on the schools.
They will be painting the boys' bathroom over there at the public center, you know, where they, what's the name of it?
Performing Arts Center?
Performing Arts Center? I'm just asking.
That's the
It's not
inside.
the inside. This is just exterior paint.
I was asking because when you walk in there, the paint's peeling off it and there's writing all over it.
I've not been in that one.
Just thought, well, you should
Avoid
have.
that.
I wouldn't expect you would be.
The ladies looks okay. Sorry. All right, and then item 6.8 is the approval of vouchers. And I know, Mr. Roy, you have some different formats in here this time. Is that-
Yes, I do.
You want to explain that?
So you'll notice that there's the usual Excel spreadsheet that you typically see on that first page for K-8 student activity funds. The benefit to that, it's all on one page. You can see it, you look across, and you can look per school or per club. Now, if you turn the page, these are actual generated reports out of our current Blue Bear system that we use for managing our student activity and auxiliary funds. And these are just point and click. So you have an elementary student activity page, and then you have the Thunderbolt student activity page. Still gives you the same information, same dollar amounts, a little more detail in some of these reports as we move on to auxiliary. But the reason why we've included both, if you go back to the very first page, the one you're used to seeing every month, this has to be manually transferred from the report you see right behind that. So basically, Aaron will run this report and take pages 1 and 2, or 2 and 3, the back side of that spreadsheet, and cut and paste from there into the Excel spreadsheet to put it all in on one page for you. It does two things. It takes time, obviously. So we're talking about not a manual entry. It's open to error because you're transferring from one to the other. You have to make sure that your cells are calculating correctly, that they're formatted correctly, and the formulas are there. We don't have we'll act on your direction, but by way of efficiency, it's nice to be able to click and print and then include in a report. But it's probably on some months it could take. This is probably the equivalent of a day's work, especially when you get into these student activity reports, and the high school's kind of lengthy.
I noticed going through here in the account analysis reports that pretty much every school standardized shirt sales account is at a negative.
And that's, you'll notice Starline is one of the few that they don't have a negative balance, and we've actually talked about this. It's a way of how the shirts are being processed and ordered. So at Starline, what we did is we pre-sold shirts. So people came in, filled out their order sheet, paid for their shirts up front, we placed the order, and then we filled the orders as they came in. And that allowed us to have money to use to pay for shirts because we knew there was going to be an expense attached to it. It is allowed that they make these orders, they place these orders, and then as the shirt orders come in, then they get reimbursed from the parents who come in and actually pay for it. And it does a couple things. It'll tend to leave you in the negative until you actually sell that many shirts, because when you're pre-ordering or when you're ordering and you're trying to kind of gauge what your population is going to order without knowing for sure, you could order, let's just say, 50 extra small gray t-shirts and thinking that your kindergarten class will pretty much consume those. But you may have a run on extra small white t-shirts. Well, now you have 30 extra small grays sitting in the cupboard there, in the closet, that you're now sitting on inventory that you've paid for, but you're not getting reimbursed for it yet. So our philosophy was, as I was administrator at Starline, is that we'll pre-order them. We'll have parents fill out the orders, they come in, and then we'll get the order placed and we'll fill those orders when they arrive. And no one seemed to care about that. It wasn't like it was a burden. I never had any complaints as far as that process goes, but at least I knew I had the money ahead of time and I can place an order and I would never go negative. And then I'm not sitting on, like I said, 15 or 20 extra small gray shirts that I'm going to have to try to push a little bit later on. I'm ordering based on the immediate demand. So that's a conversation we're going to have, to maybe tweak that in all elementary schools to go through that process.
I have a question. How much easier is it for us to make the decision to go to something like French toast and take that completely out of our schools? Because that's a lot of work, right?
It's very time consuming.
I mean, that seems like such a no-brainer, and then parents can order till their heart's content and have it 2 days.
Well, I completely agree. When we sat here and listened to our audit findings, and you heard the auditors talk about just the busyness of the front office, this is one of those things that add to the busyness of it and take away from those financial and ADM type audit findings, because they're getting sidetracked between doing their clerical job and tending to the students that are there and the parents walking in the door, and they're getting pulled away. They're getting pulled away. So I agree. If there's a way to somehow address that and move it off site and put that somewhere else, the burden on someone or something else,
I had the same type of question. In Huntsville, our local Walmart provided shirts, provided our uniforms. And you went to Walmart and bought your uniform. You didn't go to the school district to buy it, you know? And I really question, we're really not a retail organization.
No.
I'm not sure why we're doing it, but there may be, because we're an isolated country school district, that there was a reason when we first started it. But I'm not sure we can justify it.
I think it's worth pursuing, because I've heard others mention that there could be a safety issue with having anyone have access to a school uniform and put it on, but that's just whether that's justifiable, if it's a valid excuse
I
or
can
not.
take you down right
You can
now.
go to the Goodwill.
Exactly.
Take you down to
buy some
hospice
shirts.
right now
I can go to Walmart
and buy you
and buy
any shirt you want.
I agree.
Hospice has got them, Goodwill's got them.
Right.
They're all
I've
over the
heard, but I've heard that as being a concern in the
When it
past.
started,
So.
one of the considerations when it started was using local vendors, and we did get a better price from the local vendors at that time than we would have commercial, but now we have other options that we did not have at that time.
There's something to look into.
Well, one of the presentations from one of your former students was, outstanding. And I still have that book that I looked through, so.
I don't think people understand, when you talk about inventory holdover from too many mediums and too many smalls, this can become a chunk of change.
It can. Yeah.
Well, there's another issue that I become aware of, which is when parents want to use credit cards. When I was in high school, we were not able to do that. But now, people don't carry cash anymore. They don't use checks, and so they use credit cards. Well, if you look on here at what that fee has amounted to for the credit card, I questioned Mike about that, and he explained that the state only allows us to charge like $1 more than the shirt cost us, whereas a store downtown can raise the price and still make a profit without having that fee on the credit card. And this is just, unless the state legislature or whoever it is at the Department of Ed who made that policy, in their wisdom, changes that policy, we're just going in the hole on that fee.
What do we sell a shirt for, Mike?
I believe it's $6
So
for a regular T-shirt.
So it costs us with let's say the percentage rate is around 3%, just for easy math here. 30 cents for the transaction fee on top of that. So you're talking about 48 cents per shirt.
Show us where that figure appears on here. Was
The web store.
The
Web store fees for every school has a web store.
Here it is on page,
It's in the auxiliary.
under auxiliary funds, 3,400, 1710. We're in the hole over $12,000 just because of that fee, and there's no way to recoup that.
Well, but that's, I would challenge the thought process that says we're in the hole. That $12,000, I mean, if we're allowed to mark a shirt at $1 and we're not going to make anything on it, that's probably just a holding account. That's not probably an actual real number at that point.
Well, ask Mike. He didn't explain that to me
Say
that
that?
way. John is suggesting that this is not an actual number, it's just a holding number, it's not real money.
Well, it is real money, but it's, in other words, we're allowed to mark the shirt at $1.
Well, no, it's not. It's basically cents, but it's not quite $1. It'll still cover it, but the margins are extremely narrow. I mean, from the cost of it, if you factor in the web store fees, the profit margin on it is next to nothing.
Well, but
We're not trying to.
we're not in the profit
This
business.
is one of those things that we could get rid of
Yes.
and take away.
Send everybody to the uniform shop.
Correct.
Eliminate the hassle for the
This-
whole
What
district.
is- This is one of those things I'm talking about when I say, what have we cut lately?
That's right.
This
Can I
is
bring up a-
not an area in which it's designed to, by statute, for us to make any type of a gain on it. It's very, very, very little. And I think it's just, they take that into account that there are web store fees, there are transaction fees when you use a credit card. And certain times of the year, those negatives get up there, and then every so often we'll get a remittance check that'll replenish that. But it's, it's definitely a number that can get kind of scary, because it can go negative for a couple months there, and then it'll go back to positive or zero.
Speaking of scary numbers, when I also look at the analysis report on sports revenue and expense, we started September at negative $64,600 or $468.10. We finished it at negative $53,727.80. Why are we so negative on sports?
Well, what's going to happen there, it's like we've had this conversation before, is there's the next line down, the sports participation fees. It becomes a matter of when there's a transaction, at times it's coded to the wrong line item. We saw that with science. We had the allied biology, the allied health, and then the science classes. The fees were posted to the wrong account. However, a transfer from that allied health into the science allowed that negative to go away. It's the same here for the sports participation fees. You'll notice the line below that's very healthy.
Yes.
Transfer will take place and it'll clear out any negatives that are there.
Could I bring up an administrative point?
Yes.
Just think about it. It's not that important. But the first page here. As easy as it is to cut and paste nowadays, I hate it whenever I see a ledger that has just one set of numbers. And if it was me, I would have 3 consecutive months of numbers. So that as we went down this, we could say, whoa, what were we doing here? Or whoa, what were we doing there? You follow what I'm saying?
Well, that's what Mike's job is.
So to have a month, okay.
On this one here.
Okay.
The front one, the vouchers.
What I'm just saying, it would bring a quick focus on some radical movement in one way or another. Am I making sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And if you've got last month's report, just copy those spreadsheet numbers down along, you see what I'm saying?
Because I just photocopy mine. I know what you're saying, but
Yeah,
it would
I'm
be
just saying, it's just,
no, it
it would be
because
quicker
I
if you
do,
pick this, if you
so
pick
that I
this
can-
up and you pick this up and you saw January, February, March.
Right.
And this is March. You quickly see if there was any transitions going on that might be questionable or where you might want an explanation of.
That's exactly
don't-
why
you
I
don't-
do that. So
You don't
I
have to do
understand.
that, Mike. I'm just saying that's the way I would do it.
Is this a cut and paste, or is this a report that you just print as
No,
is?
this is actually done through our accounts payable. So this is an actual spreadsheet that she compiles. So we could do that. We could add a couple of columns, or I can do that to the report that I give you that's detailed. Well, I probably won't be able to because
This would be easy because
Yeah,
you could
this-
just shrink
this'll
this
be-
column.
You
and-
don't have to
this-
do it right away.
this'll
Just
work.
think about it and see if it doesn't make sense.
yeah, I could do that.
And along those lines,
So would you rather have 3 months or a year to date and then the current month, or?
I'd rather have 3 months
Okay.
myself now, but I don't know how the board feels. I always find it's better when I'm looking at financial statements to look at comparisons, look at the differences, look what's transpiring, than to just look at a list of numbers.
Okay.
I agree on the 3 months.
I like the 3 months because I only looked the month prior, but I would like to have 3 months.
Okay.
I did go back and print a year ago today, so that was kind of interesting to see just in,
Well, see, now that's
How
why I
far
said
down
don't be in a
payroll?
hurry, because that's another thing you could do. You could have 2016, and then you could have 2 months and this month, right? And that way, like she said, she went back a year, you could look at, well, what do we do this month? Whoa, what did we do last year? But take your time.
So prior year,
Yeah,
October prior year,
yeah.
basically.
Don't think that's an emergency. It's just something that,
well,
In
it's
the
just
long
funny you
run-
brought it up because I
Yeah.
print
in the
that
long run, you'll
just for
find it
that reason.
clarifies a lot of things. It may seem right now confusing,
No, that
but in
makes
the long
perfect
run,
sense.
it'll clarify a lot of stuff.
So would you like the previous year and then the 2 months before that as well?
Yeah, I think
So
that
four-
would be,
so four
that would be
columns
great.
total? Okay.
Yeah.
That would be awesome. Because then we could see where we're coming down.
And then you can
on
use
our
your artistic
expenses.
ability, you can bold lines on one of them and put pretty yellow and red. No, you can
Maybe
do
some
lots of stuff.
paisleys.
As long as I could use my artistic ability, then I'll do it.
In all seriousness, insurance proceeds. 39,000.
I'll have to, you'll have the detailed report next week, the one
Okay,
that I always
okay.
supply, so that'll show you how many vouchers were actually used to make up that 36,000.
Okay.
Maybe something different from me. This is 36.
36.
I just am
Sorry.
transposing my numbers.
It's just last month it was 0, so it made me wonder.
I believe, just off the top of my head, I believe that was reimbursement for, or the, yeah, it was for, I believe it was used for the high school when we had that, when we had to replace the 5 air conditioning units. I believe it's just now coming through, but I'll double check. I'm almost positive I saw that as the Pueblo invoice that came through.
Anything else on that item? So on our informational items, there is some information from Ed Services, and personnel has done a tech update on where we are right now in the process for our upgrades and Active Directory implementation, and then Special Services has an update as well. So that is our agenda.
When are we going to get the appraisals for the lot that we might exchange?
We didn't move forward on that. We were consulting with legal as to how we're going to proceed regarding whether or not we want to purchase it or sell it and have someone else purchase it or sit on it. That was the recommendation at the time, was to...
So the appraisals are in, and you're consulting with...
No, we don't have, we didn't move forward with that because...
We didn't move forward with that.
We would either have to pay for the appraisal, or the proposal at the time was to have the client, the realtor's client, pay for the appraisal. But then us sitting, basically we wanted to have him pay for it and then us review it and still have the ability to say no. But that, according to how that was written in the actual agenda.
I remember that now. I guess at the time I was expecting or hoping that the gentleman would come back with an offer to pay for the appraisal of both.
Don't hold your
Of
breath.
the lots, okay. That would be far too long now.
I did talk to I've talked to the realtor since then, and he's still aggressively trying to work some things out up and down that block. He's still interested, but unfortunately that if we want to sell that property, it has to go in a whole different direction. There's a whole other process in making that happen. We couldn't just engage with that particular individual and work out a transaction. And it has to be open.
What I'm thinking of is, the last time we bought a second home in Phoenix, and the appraisal, the appraiser went to other houses similar in the neighborhood and gave us an idea of what that they were worth, which gave me an idea of whether the house we were purchasing was, so I mean, it just doesn't seem that complicated.
No, they would do comps as far as
Right.
giving us a comp as to how much that property would be worth, but we would have to pay for that.
Okay, how much would we have to pay?
I'd have to look into that. I know with a house in residential, you're probably looking at right around $500, $600.
It's not going to be too terribly different on a lot. And you're probably, just knowing the area, because I own property there and I own some property in Kiowa, you're probably, for that lot, you're probably about 60, maybe 65 on the top end is what a good going rate is. But then you've got to put it out to a bid process.
And what is that? What are those lots zoned? How are they zoned?
They're C1s.
Okay.
They're a basic commercial lot.
I know you may not be able to do this for the next meeting with the two grant studies here, but I think it would be appropriate for us to have a really strong presentation on these grants. How many teachers have participated? How many are proceeding toward their master? And what the projected impact is upon our student body. If we're doing this, we must be doing it to educate children. And I'd like to know what we project the impact of this is going to be. I think we also need to know how many come from what schools. Are we front-loading and packing certain schools when we may need to have those teachers teaching in other places once they're trained? Just a report, just something so that we can analyze exactly what we're doing with these grants,
Which grants in particular are you referring to?
both grants.
They're both referenced in the write-up in the back.
Okay.
And I don't have a problem with the grants, I just question whether we're accomplishing our purpose. That's all.
So in this one, 23 teachers have attended the training, so that was the one on the NT3. That one's for the national board. But the master teacher grant, we've been doing a lot with that. We can get some data.
So I didn't hear you, I apologize.
She didn't hear you, you didn't hear her.
What's that?
He didn't hear you.
Oh,
I apologize.
no, that's okay. On the NT3 grant, that's the national board training, so we've had 23 teachers involved with that one. On the master teacher grant, that's been a lot of our training that we've been doing ongoing, so we have a lot of data on that.
Yeah, and, and all I'm saying is, I don't want to see us spending grant money, and we're not having a true impact in the classroom. This ought to be convertible to something we can measure.
I have a question too. I noticed in the report about the athletic field that internet connection, there'll have to be some retrenching, and that was not figured into the budget. Can E-rate be applied to that or not?
Actually, there's a different thought process on that I sent, and our new technology supervisor had already talked to Denise about. A lot of the issues that you have with trenching, especially across that wash, because it is a federal waterway, it's Coast Guard regulated, can be eliminated with point-to-point Wi-Fi.
Okay.
They build now 10, 20, 30 gigabit point-to-point Wi-Fi devices, so it's just literally two high-powered dishes pointed at each other. In fact, you can get a little bit of a larger dish and then split that signal down to 2 or 3 different sub-dishes. So we could power the football field and the lower fields off of a single dish off of, say, the library at the high school, and then put up receiver points for those on the lower end.
How does the cost of doing that compare to the expense of retrenching?
Oh boy, if you had to get in there and trench and get federal
Oh, I
permits and
know.
everything
No,
else,
I know.
I'd rather put up the 2 sticks and call it a day.
So, and do we have the money to do that?
E-rate is going to drop about another 800,000, is the number I've heard, into the thought process on technology. I'm not in charge of the budget, but you're not talking $100,000 project, so it's.
So is E-rate totally designated to certain projects, or is there
It's
some?
designated to go back into technology.
And would this be considered technology then, the athletic fields and Wi-Fi
Yes.
connection?
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Connecting
Connection.
that is technology.
I just didn't know if it had to have some educational value.
The other statement that's in the packet is that at this point, technology is on budget versus bond. It's at or below. So there's a pretty good likelihood that when the E-rate money comes in, because it hasn't come in yet, is my understanding, that you'll have the ability to do that. I would want to conserve as much of that as possible, because we only put 1 round into technology. We were asked for 2 rounds, and we budgeted 1 out of the 2. So when we get about 7 years into this, we're going to have to really seriously start thinking about either an additional bond, or how do we start to replace what we've just replaced.
Yes, that's going to be ongoing.
So it's part of the thought process, and the more you can conserve and be responsible on this side of it, the less you're going to be.
Right.
But connecting the lower section of the school, I think, is important long term.
Any other questions?
Do you have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Pat Rooney,
Yes.
Ellen Ward,
Yes.
John Masson,
Yes.
Kathy Cox,
Yes.
Nicole Cohen.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. The only